Hebrews chapter 11. We are turning to Genesis. But Hebrews chapter 11, verse 21 says, "By faith Jacob, when he was a dying, blessed both the sons of Joseph and worshipped, leaning upon the top of his staff." So I began studying just that part of his life, the last part of his elderly life, and what part of faith that involved and everything. But I thought, this needs to be included because it kind of adds emphasis to that. And then I added that, and I thought, well, you know what? So does this. And the more I started adding, I thought, well, let's just do his life. And so we're going to pause for a few weeks here and just look at Jacob's life. It was actually back in the early 90s when a pastor friend of mine, Doug Fisher, he's preached here before, from Lemon Grove, California, one of my favorite preachers, actually my favorite preacher of all. But he recommended me years ago when I was just new into the ministry. He said, "Dave, study two people primarily in the Old Testament and one in the New. Besides the life of Christ." But he says, if you study anybody in the New Testament, study the Apostle Paul. If you study anybody in the Old Testament, study Jacob and study David. And I for the next couple of years, I did. And I fell in love with the Old Testament. Where a lot of people do not love the Old Testament, I do. I love it. There's so much there. And so we're going to look at Jacob's life. And when we get to the end, we'll notice his right hand, we'll notice his staff, and we'll notice his knees. And all of it has something to do with that faith aspect of it. So we'll get all that. But Genesis chapter 28, please. Chapter 28. Now there's no PowerPoint. And really, the only reason, there's two. One is I was lacking a little bit of time, but I could have got it done. But then the length of this Bible study, I thought, man, that's going to take about 2 hours just to do the PowerPoint. And I thought, let's hang it, So that's why. But so let's look at, first of all, the traveler. What I've done is I've looked at his life, generally speaking, not since his birth, but where it all begins. And we're going to look at the traveler. So we're going to read several verses and then fill in some blanks and kind of get a bird's eye view of his life. A little bit more in detail than just a summary, though. But look with me at chapter 28, verse 10. "And Jacob went out from Beersheba and went toward Haran. And he lighted upon a certain place and tarried there all night, because the sun was set. And he took of the stones of that place and put them for his pillows, and lay down in that place to sleep. And he dreamed, and behold, a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God ascending and descending on it. Behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord, God of Abraham, thy father, and the God of Isaac." Again, the word father is a generic term. "The land whereon thou liest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed, and thy seed shall be as the dust of the earth, and thou shalt spread abroad to the west, and to the east, to the north, and to the south. And in thee and in thy seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed. And behold, I am with thee, and will keep thee in all places whither thou goest, and will bring thee again into this land, for I will not leave thee until I have done that which I have spoken of thee of." That sounds kind of familiar to the Christian promise, doesn't it? I mean, it really does. I will not leave thee. But here we see, letter A, the vision. The vision. He gets this vision of this ladder, and angels are going up and down it, and where God is promising him several things, including the promise of the land. But not only do we see the vision, but we see the vow. The vow. Look at verse 16. Now, this is where he is going to build an altar, and it's at a place that's going to be called Bethel. Look at verse 16. And Jacob awaked out of his sleep and said, surely the Lord is in this place. I have that phrase underlined in my Bible. And he said, and I knew it not. He was afraid and said, how dreadful is this place? This is none other but the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. And Jacob rose up early in the morning and took the stone that he had put for his pillows and set it up for a pillar, poured oil upon the top of it. He called the name of that place Bethel. The name of that city was called Luz at the first. And Jacob vowed a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and raiment to put on, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then shall the Lord be my God. And this stone which I have set for a pillar shall be God's house, and of all that shall give me, I will surely give the tenth unto thee. A couple of years ago in California, I was a couple, probably 7 or 8 years ago, we took a couples retreat down to Escondido, California. Just a little drive. It's out in the mountains, and several couples there. We had, 6 or 7 hours by ourselves. And so Michelle and I were going to be doing something that day. I don't know what. It doesn't matter. But that morning before she got up, I went for a hike. It was right by the mountains. I went up to the trail and went up there. Later, I found out that they had spotted some cougars and such. Thanks for telling me. But I was up there, and it was just a rocky terrain. I built an altar there. I took the rocks there, and I just had a great time with the Lord, looking out for the cougars, keeping one eye closed and one eye open, amen. But it was the same thing as a vow. So he makes this vow to God, I will serve you. So that's the traveler. Now we see the lover. We get to chapter 29, and here's when he's going to meet a girl. Woo! And he's going to fall for Rachel. So letter A, love for Rachel. And we still see a little bit that he's traveling, because actually in chapter 29, verse 1, then Jacob went on his journey. So he's traveling. In fact, throughout his life, he's really a traveler. And there's a couple of maps at the end that we'll get to eventually, but you'll see some of the cities that he'll be bebopping around to place. But here, number one, he meets Rachel. He meets Rachel. Look at the end of verse 2. There's a well that he comes up on, and a great stone was upon the well's mouth. Now, it was the custom back then to keep the wells covered for a couple of reasons: to protect the water that's in the well so that the sun doesn't dry it, or the sand or anything doesn't get in the water. So it protects the well, but it protects also any animals that might fall into the well. So many times they would cover the well with a rock. So here was Jacob. He's traveling, and there was a rock or stone. You see that in verse 3 on the well's mouth. And he put the stone again upon the well's mouth in its place after he gathered the flock. And so they meet. Look down at verse number 9. And while he spake with them, those are some other cattlemen, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she kept them. And it came to pass, when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, that Jacob went near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. I don't know why I had to mention that 3 times, but it's just like his mother's brother, his mother's brother, his mother's brother. But anyway, Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted up his voice and wept. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's brother and that he was Rebekah's son, and she ran and told her father. So he meets Rachel. I don't know. I remember years ago when I was being baptized. Back then I used to lift weights, and there was a girl in the church that I knew that had a crush on me. And so when I got baptized, I was flexing my muscles to go down. And I was doing it for the Lord, but honestly, I wanted her to see my muscles. And, that's the truth. I wonder if Rachel was there and Jacob was like, let me get this stone, and starting to flex, and doing it for her. But anyway, just something I think about sometimes. But not only he meets Rachel, but now he meets, number two, meets Laban. Meets Laban. Well, we know that she ran and told her father that Jacob was there. But look at verse 13. It came to pass when Laban heard the tidings of Jacob, his sister's son, that he ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. And he told Laban all these things. Laban said to him, surely thou art my bone and my flesh. And he abode with him the space of a month. Now, during the time of a month, you get to know somebody. You get to know their character somewhat. Laban said unto Jacob, because thou art my brother, shouldest thou therefore serve me for naught? Tell me, what shall thy wages be? Now that right there is the beginning of a relationship, not only between Jacob and Laban, but of an employee and employer. If you've ever been treated bad by an employer, Laban is one of those guys that changed Jacob's wages 10 different times. And in fact, he brings it up later. Verse 16, and Laban had two daughters. The name of the elder was Leah. The name of the younger was Rachel. Leah was tender-eyed, but Rachel was beautiful and well-favored. All right, so he's getting to know the family. They are getting to know him. So letter A was love for Rachel. Letter B is labor for Rachel. Labor for Rachel. Number one, underneath that, diligence. Diligence. And folks, I'm just going to go until it's sort of time, and that's where we'll stop and we'll pick up, okay? Diligence. Look at verse 18. Jacob loved Rachel and said, I will serve thee 7 years for Rachel, thy younger daughter. Laban said, it is better that I give her to thee than that I should give her to another man. Abide with me. Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed unto him but a few days, for the love he had to her. So number one is diligence. Diligence, because he worked 7 years and labors for Rachel. But then we see, number two, deception. Deception. Well, the wedding day comes, and Laban does the old switcheroony. And since we are all adults, I'm going to be a little graphic here, but look at verse 22, or 21. And Jacob said unto Laban, give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, that I may go in unto her. Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast, which was common for a marriage. And it came to pass in the evening that he took Leah, his daughter, or Leah, and brought her to him, and he went in unto her. Now, again, not to be overthinking this, but Leah and Rachel had to be the same or similar body type, because he is having intimacy with Leah and not knowing. I mean, you would have known the very first time if they were different sizes. But nevertheless, he switches the daughters. Verse 24, and Laban gave unto his daughter Leah Zilpah his maid for a handmaid. It came to pass in the morning, behold, it was Leah. And he said to Laban, have you ever got the impression that sometimes guys, the very first time they see their wife without makeup, behold, different person. But anyway, what is it that thou hast done unto me? Did not I serve with thee for Rachel? Wherefore then hast thou beguiled me? You've deceived me. You've tricked me. This is our arrangement, but that was not what we agreed upon. Laban said, this was his rationale, it must not be so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Fulfill her week, and we will give thee this also for the service which thou shalt serve with me yet 7 other years. Now, the reason why he's doing this will fold out, because he notices, in fact, he'll say the phrase, I have learned by experience. He'll notice that Jacob is favored, he's blessed, and he can get some cheap labor out of this. And so you watch it fulfill here. Look at verse 28. Jacob did so and fulfilled her week and gave him Rachel, his daughter, to wife also. Laban gave to Rachel his daughter Bilhah, his handmaid, to be her maid. All right, so you have Rachel, Leah, and you have Zilpah and Bilhah. Those are the handmaids right now. And verse 30, and he went in also unto Rachel. So that means he's now had intimate relations now with two women. And he loved also Rachel more than Leah, and he served with him yet 7 other years. So you can imagine inside the home that between these two women is a sense of favoritism, because he has a love for one and not a love for the other. He was hooked into one relationship. So that emotion is there. There is a sense of betrayal on Jacob's part towards his new father-in-law. That emotion is there. I want to put all this in context. So that's the traveler, that's the lover. Now we see number 3, the family man. All right, so letter A is Jacob's 4 wives, which are Rachel and Leah. And both of those are barren for a while, so they do not have children. So again, they come up with a solution of go to the women, the handmaids, and have to bear children through them. So now he goes into, has intimate relationships with Bilhah and Zilpah. They give birth as well. And so the next several verses into chapter 30 talk about those 4 wives. Those 4 women, 2 wives and 2 concubines, or handmaids, bear how many children eventually? How many sons does he have? 12. All right, so that's the next point. Letter B, Jacob's 12 sons. And in your notes, you have all the references that goes through all of this, because it basically says such and such was not having children, so he went unto her, and then she had children, and the other wife says, oh yeah, well I can do that too, and gives the other handmaid to him, and so he is, boy, I want to be careful here. He is a man that is surrounded with women, and he is being fulfilled. All right, so letter C, Jacob's one daughter. One daughter. Now, I do want to point out something here. Look with me at verse number 14, chapter 30. Okay, well, let's back up to verse 1. And when Rachel saw that she bare Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister and said unto Jacob, give me children, or else I die. And now Jacob gets mad, and Jacob's anger was kindled. Basically, it's like, oh, I'm doing my part, it's not my fault, but there's this demanding going on, there's an envy going on. And then the plan, verse 3, behold, my maid Bilhah, going unto her, she shall bear upon my knees, notice the knees, that I may also have children by her. She gave him Bilhah, her handmaid, to wife, and Jacob went unto her. Bilhah conceives. And so now the 2 handmaids are bearing children. Leah eventually has children. Rachel, after a while, has children. I want you to watch something here. Look at verse 13. Leah said, happy am I, for the daughters will call me blessed, and she called his name Asher. All right, so now Leah is having children, and through her handmaid having children, more so than Rachel is. And but watch verse 14. And Reuben went in the days of wheat harvest, and found mandrakes in the field, brought them unto his mother Leah. Notice who he brings them to. Then Rachel said to Leah, give me, I pray thee, of thy son's mandrakes. She said unto her, is it a small matter that thou hast taken my husband? And wouldest thou take away my son's mandrakes also? So here's Leah, and she's like, why would you've taken my husband, why would I give my son's mandrakes away? So Leah knew that Rachel was favored and liked. Now watch this. And Rachel said, therefore he shall lie with thee tonight for thy son's mandrakes. it almost gives the connotation here that it wasn't customary or a common thing as much for him to lie with Leah as it was for Rachel. Jacob came out of the field in the evening, and Leah went out to meet him and said, "Thou must come in unto me, for surely I have hired thee with my son's mandrakes." And he lay with her that night. And she has another child. And in fact, go down to verse 19, she conceives again and bare Jacob the sixth son. So several children are being born here, and there's this competition, envy, anger, frustration, bartering, just all this thing going on in this family man's life. And which goes to show you, I mean, if you look at it in detail and think about the verses and the emotion behind it, it goes to show you that really in any church, behind a family man is really sometimes problems. You never know what's really going on in the home by looking at somebody in church. You know what I mean? You really don't. Because Jacob, I'm sure, although it doesn't necessarily indicate it, did not expose all this strife in the home to everyone out there. There was no Facebook to post it on, you know. But let's go on. By the way, look at chapter 30, verse 21. And afterwards she bare a daughter and called her name Dinah. Now, if there are more daughters, this is the only one the Bible mentions. And so that's the one that we'll mention. Number 4, the employee. The employee. Letter A, the specification. The specification. Now, look with me at chapter 30, verse 22. And God remembered Rachel, and God hearkened to her and opened her womb. So she's been watching all these other women give children. She conceived and bare a son and said, God hath taken away my reproach. She called his name Joseph and said, the Lord shall add to me another son. It shall come to pass when Rachel had borne Joseph that Jacob said unto Laban, send me away that I may go into mine own place and to my country. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served thee, and let me go. For thou knowest my service which I have done thee. So he's basically, as an employee, going to the employer saying, I've proven myself. Let me go. Let me out of the contract. Laban said to him, I pray thee, if I have found favor in thine eyes, tarry. Now watch this next phrase. For I have learned by experience that the Lord hath blessed me for thy sake. Now, that speaks volumes to me, because I want, the more that I'm around somebody, I want them to learn by experience that God is with me. I want them to see Christ in me. You know what I mean? I mean, it doesn't matter whether I'm with my wife or my kids or out in the community. I want them to learn by experience that God is with me. And here's what Laban was saying. He says, I've learned by experience that the Lord's blessed me because of you. So he said, appoint me thy wages, and I will give it. He said to him, thou knowest how I have served thee, and how thy cattle was with me. For it was little which thou hast before I came, and it is now increased unto a multitude, and the Lord hath blessed thee since my coming. So Jacob is bearing a record here, saying, you know, I've helped you out, man. And now when shall I provide for mine own house? He says, it's time for us to separate, okay, from my father-in-law and to do my own family. And he does this so number one, the request. That's the blank there, the request. He's requesting of Laban to take leave. Now, Laban sort of agrees to it. Look at verse 34. Laban said, behold, I would it might be according to thy word. And he basically says, okay, here's what we'll do. I'll take all the worst of the animals, and you take all the best of the animals, and we'll see what happens. Well, the results were just the opposite of what would expect. Jacob was, again, blessed by God, and so even though he had the worst of the animals, he got the best. So number 2, I don't know if I told you that, the results. The results. And that takes us to the end of chapter 30. It uses phrases there that it says in like verse 30, the flocks conceived before the rods and brought forth cattle, ring-straked, speckled, and spotted. And so it's talking about how some animals are flawed and some are not. And they started out one way and they did not end up that way because God was blessing. All right, so letter A was the specification. Letter B, the separation. We'll end here just shortly here. All right, so they are going to separate, but number 1, the reasons for separation. The reasons for separation. Letter A, Laban's resentment. Look with me at chapter 31, please. Chapter 31. And he heard the words of Laban's sons, saying, Jacob hath taken away all that was our father's, and of that which was our father's hath he gotten all this glory. Now stop there. Is what they're saying true? No, it's not. But from their perspective, because they're the ones to inherit it, their perspective is skewed, and they are thinking, how dare Jacob take our inheritance? They took my daddy's inheritance. He took all the best. And so they're complaining, and now they're going to convince their daddy, Laban, to resent Jacob. Now watch verse 2. And Jacob beheld the countenance of Laban, and behold, it was not toward him as before. Now sometimes, even in church, we can tell someone's countenance that something's different about them. They've got an extra burden upon them, and sometimes we're really good at masking it, in church. You ask, how you doing? Oh, good. And you're really carrying a heavy load, a burden. But here was something so bothersome to Laban that it was evident on his face. Because oftentimes what's on the inside will come on the outside. So Jacob notices that, and he wants to do something about it. And by the way, I don't know if it's in your notes, but the resentment came because of the son's counsel, and then we see Laban's countenance. Son's counsel and Laban's countenance. Let me give you 2 more points, we'll be done. Look at verse 3. And the Lord said unto Jacob, return unto the land of thy fathers and to thy kindred, and I will be with thee. Now that's the second time the Lord has promised Jacob specifically that we've read tonight, I will be with thee. And he is telling Jacob to leave. Skip down to verse 13. I am the God of Bethel, where thou anointest the pillar, and where thou vowedest a vow unto me. Now arise, get thee out from this land, and return unto the land of thy kindred. So now there's the second command, just in this passage, to go, to flee. And that's coming from God. By the way, look at verse 7. Verse 6, you could tell that he's talking to the daughters. Jacob, it says, ye know that with all my power I have served your father, and your father hath deceived me and changed my wages 10 times. So he's now convincing the women, his wives, says, you know your daddy. You know he's tricked me. You know he deceived me. In fact, Leah, I married you because of deception. So that was number 1. So he says, you know your daddy. And so I've been told by God twice now to leave. So letter B is God's revelation. God's revealing to him, telling him to return to the land of thy fathers. And then last point here is Rachel and Leah's reassurance. Now, the only thing I want to say here is Rachel and Leah could have made a choice here and said, my daddy raised me, I'm going to stick with my daddy. They could have done all of that. Look at verse 14. And Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, is there yet any portion or inheritance for us in our father's house? Are we not counted of him strangers? For he hath sold us, hath quite devoured also our money. For all the riches which God had taken from our father, that is ours, and our children's. Now then, whatsoever God hath said unto thee, do. So now they're giving Jacob reassurance that says, look, if God's told you to do that, then do it, which is good advice for all of us. So we're going to stop right there, and we'll pick up at number 2 next Wednesday. Father, thank you for the life of Jacob, and Lord, with every family, there are emotions involved. Sometimes there's competition, sometimes there's envy and anger, and yet we see a family man that you've certainly given him a purpose and a calling, but sometimes strife hinders that. Sometimes the struggle that personalities have causes conflict and added stress in life. And I pray that you'd help us not to have, much like Laban's boys, a skewed opinion, a distorted way of thinking. There's a lot of that going on with politics now. If people see one thing and it's really not that way at all. And yet sometimes it's that way in life. We see one side of the issue and not the totality of it. And Lord, as different people are interacting with each other, husbands and wives and kids and family members and even church members, God, may we all understand that we have different personalities, different thought wavelengths, and I pray, God, that you'd help us not to strive against each other, but Lord, may we work with one another to do whatsoever you have bid us to do. As Rachel and Leah reassured Jacob to do, may we be obedient as well. Bless these precious people, and thank you for their faithfulness to you. In Jesus' name, amen. Have a great night.